Hello, and welcome to Hadassah Magazine Presents, a program and podcast for those who love Hadassah Magazine and want more, and for those who have never heard of the magazine and are looking for stimulating conversations with acclaimed Jewish authors, thinkers, celebrities, and culinary stars. I'm your host, Lisa Hostein, the executive editor of Hadassah Magazine. I'm so delighted to be in conversation today with Allegra Goodman, with the critically acclaimed master storyteller whose latest book, This Is Not About Us, brings us deep into the soul of an American Jewish family, some of whose characteristics we may recognize in our own families. It's what the New York Times called, quote, a wise, witty exploration of a contemporary American family and a deliciously readable book. Thanks to all of you in the audience today. We've got large numbers in the several hundreds for joining us today. If this is your first Hadassah Magazine Presents program, a special welcome. And hope you take the time to learn more about Hadassah and the work that the largest Jewish women's organization in the United States does to heal those in Israel through its 2 world-class hospitals in Jerusalem and its youth aliyah villages for at-risk children, as well as through its advocacy in the United States on matters relating to Israel, anti-Semitism, women's empowerment, and women's health, including reproductive rights and conflict-related sexual violence. This is an especially important and urgent time for Hadassah. We'd like to thank the generous supporters who enabled Hadassah to immediately transition into emergency mode when the war with Iran began a month ago, putting up additional fortification, adding 40 beds and equipment in an underground parking garage for additional capacity, and providing the mental health support not only for the victims of missile strikes, but for the millions affected by the war, including Hadassah staff who have been heroes in this stressful environment. There is a significant need to finish, equip, and expand the underground fortified facilities. There is no way to know what comes next and what the world will need tomorrow or next week in this crisis, but Hadassah's ability to react in real time has been crucial. So please consider an extra donation if you've already contributed, or perhaps a first one if you're new to the organization. All donations are valued. A link for giving is in the chat box, as is a link for membership. And if you're not already a member, please consider joining so you can stay informed about Hadassah's work and also enjoy the magazine, which is free with membership, as well as all the wonderful programming the magazine and the rest of Hadassah provides. Also, a special shout out to the Wycliffe Country Club book group in Wellington, Florida, whose members are with us tonight. The group wants you to know, Allegra, that you have big fans in sunny Florida. They chose this book as their choice for their April discussion, and 2 months ago they discussed one of your other books, Isola. We welcome audience questions throughout the conversation. Please be sure to write them in the Q&A. The chat is where we will disseminate information to you. And be sure to stay tuned to the very end when I will announce the 2 lucky winners of a complimentary copy of This Is Not About Us. And now for a fuller introduction to our featured guest. Allegra Goodman's new book, This Is Not About Us, is a Late Show with Stephen Colbert book club selection and a new read selection from the Jewish Book Council. Her award-winning novels include Isola, Sam, The Chalk Artist, Intuition, and Catterskills Falls, which was a National Book Award finalist. Her fiction has appeared in The New Yorker and elsewhere and has been anthologized in the O. Henry Awards and Best American Short Stories. Her essays and reviews have appeared in the New York Times Book Review, the Wall Street Journal, the New Republic, the Washington Post, the Boston Globe, and the American Scholar. Raised in Honolulu, Goodman studied English and philosophy at Harvard and received a PhD in English literature from Stanford. She is the recipient of a Whiting Writers Award, the Salon Award for Fiction, and fellowships from MacDowell and the Radcliffe Institute for Advanced Study. She lives with her family in Cambridge, Massachusetts. Wow, welcome, Allegra. It's just a mouthful to introduce you. I'm so thrilled to be hosting you today.
I'm so happy to be here with you.
I'm a real fan, and I love this tale of a Jewish family. I highly encourage everybody to read it if you haven't already. There's links to purchase the book, and of course, you know where to find books. So I want to start really simply by asking you to give a brief synopsis of This Is Not About Us for those who might not have yet read it.
This Is Not About Us is the story of a Jewish American family. They live on the East Coast, and they comprise 3 generations. The grandparents, who are in their 70s, early 80s, their middle-aged children in their 50s, and then the grandchildren, who are young adults, teens and early 20s. And the book is about how they all interact, how they love each other, how they make each other crazy, how they fight, how they evolve over time together. It's about their relationship. It's also a portrait of Jewish American life, of one part of Jewish American life.
And we're going to get into a lot of those details as we move forward. But, with your early works, you rapidly became one of the most well-known female Jewish authors. Then you branched out into the non-Jewish world, writing Sam and Isola, which is a historical novel, also wonderful, and both of which have virtually no Jewish content. And now you're back with an undeniably Jewish story. So what brought you back to Jewish storytelling?
I guess my answer is that I never really left. This book I was writing during the time I wrote Sam and during the time I wrote my historical novel. So really, I've been working on it for almost 15 years. It's just that I was writing about these Jewish people and writing this Jewish material in shorter pieces that were being published in magazines. So, from my perspective, I never stopped. Although I also think, I'm allowed to write about all kinds of people, as writers are. Writing about the American Jewish community in particular is just a hugely important subject for me. And, I think I'm always going to return to it.
Why is it such an important subject for you?
I think it's such an interesting culture, and it is such a diverse group of people. And of course, it is my people. So, the old adage is write about what you know. And I know the people in this book, not personally. And of course, they're not in my family, which is thus the title. This is not about us, but I know them. I know how they talk. I know what they're thinking.
Well, let's talk about that. The Rubensteins, that's the name of the family. There's 3 generations, as you mentioned. So how much did you mine from your own family? There's got to be some pieces of it that maybe are represented there. Or do you want to reveal any of that?
Well, it's funny. When I finished the book, I emailed it to my daughter, who's my youngest child is now working in London. And she called me and she said, I think it's really cute how you labeled the document. This is not about us, to reassure the family. And I said, I wasn't trying to reassure the family. That's the title. And then there was this long pause and she said, it is about our family. So actually, no. I mean, it really is fiction. I use my imagination. I use things I've observed in my family and other families. I have warned readers that they may see something they recognize in the book from their own experience. And, I always advise people, if that happens to you, just deny everything, which is what I do.
Or embrace it, right? Why not?
Yeah.
There are a few good characteristics in there. Not so many, but some, right? Who's your favorite character? I mean, there's so many richly drawn individuals across the 3 generations. Who's your favorite?
I actually don't have a favorite character. I never do. And I love them all. And actually, there's pieces of me in all of them, including the men, including the children, including the old ladies. The project of the book was to take their perspective and become them and perform them for the reader in the reader's imagination. And so that was my goal. I don't have a favorite. When I'm in the point of view of a character, I commit and I completely take that person's point of view. So for example, there's a divorce in this book and we hear Richard's point of view at the beginning of the book. But then as the book progresses, we hear from his ex-wife, Deborah, and we understand her point of view. And, there's no heroes or villains in this book. Everybody is flawed and everybody is trying. Sometimes they get on each other's nerves, but, to me, these are basically good people. I really love them all.
And the title that you mentioned, you told your daughter that didn't come from the family. So where did the title come from?
So the title is the title of one of the pieces in the book, and it's a bat mitzvah story. I felt that, I think the bat mitzvah has been neglected in fiction. So I wanted to write about a girl's bat mitzvah. And in this particular bat mitzvah, Richard, the guy getting divorced, he is now divorced from his wife, but he is dating the bat mitzvah girl's, his daughter's tutor, her bat mitzvah tutor. But he and Heather, the tutor, decide that they're not going to go public with this news because they don't want to overshadow Lily's day, the little girl's day. It's really about her, not about them. So Heather and Richard say to each other, this is not about us. And that's the title of that bat mitzvah chapter in the book. And, later I was trying to think of a title for the whole book, and my sister actually suggested that I take that title and use it for the whole book. And of course, it has different resonance when it's the title of the book from what Richard and Deborah say to each other. But I like the playfulness of it.
Absolutely. It's very playful. So you grew up in Hawaii, a beautiful but somewhat barren Jewish place, if I may say that, right? So to what degree did that experience, if at all, influence the way you came to think about and write about Jewish families?
Hawaii is beautiful. I wouldn't use the word barren in any context with Hawaii. It's a very interesting place to grow up as a Jewish person. There may be people from Hawaii, like, listening now. I would say there wasn't really a critical mass of Jewish people in Hawaii when I was growing up. And we didn't really have sort of the institutional Judaism that, my characters in this book take for granted. We didn't have multiple synagogues. We had one Reform temple. There was no Chabad when I was growing up in Hawaii, although one began there when I was in college. We had no kosher butcher, so our family got our kosher meat from Long Beach, California. We had no JCC. It's sort of the cultural part of Judaism just wasn't there because there just weren't enough people. There were sort of barely people to make a minyan a lot of times. And, if you wanted to live a Jewish life in Hawaii, it was a very intentional choice. I would say that growing up there as a Jewish child was in many ways a gift for me as a writer, because a lot of what people take for granted in mainland Judaism and sort of mainstream Judaism was exotic and interesting to me. And I experienced it when I came to the mainland as somebody who was not entirely on the inside, but also on the outside. Like, I noticed more things because I came from so far away. And I appreciated more things because I came so far away, from so far away.
Hmm. I want to talk a little bit about the format. So you returned to a form of storytelling through linked stories, which you had employed earlier on in your career. I love what NPR's book reviewer Maureen Corrigan had to say about this in reviewing your book. You probably heard this, right? She said, quote, "I worried that returning to a familiar formula might mean that Goodman was running out of energy as a writer. Then I started reading and stopped worrying." She went on to say she holds fast to the gifts that have marked her since her earliest books: psychological acuity, humor, and an abiding curiosity about the volatile chemistry of people bound together by affinity, profession, or blood. So I guess you weren't really running out of energy, right? I mean, I laughed. I can't imagine how you reacted to that line. But I do know, and you mentioned that you've been writing and publishing some of these stories that make up This Is Not About Us for several years now. So if they weren't originally intended to be connected, how did they become so? And what is it about this form of writing that continues to speak to you?
I actually did intend to connect the stories and make a book from the very beginning in this project. 30 years ago, when The Family Markowitz was published, that book, I was extremely young, and I wrote those stories sort of separately and then put them together into a book. But I had for years wanted to write a linked story cycle like this, a novel, a serial novel, as I think of it, and publish it as I went. And so I had this plan from the beginning. I did spend a lot of time, once I had a bunch of the stories, shaping it. And I describe it as sort of like growing a tree. And then I did prune the tree a bit and shape it, towards the end. But I always wanted to use this format to explore this family. And the reason I like this form for this purpose is that it's a way of using multiple points of view to look at a family from all sides. And I think each story enriches the others. The name Rubenstein actually means ruby stone. And I often thought of this family as like a jewel that I was turning to the light and looking at the different facets of the family.
Interesting. Well, it's also interesting. I think over the course of the time that you've been writing, the use of the multiple viewpoints is more common. It just seems to me you're more expert to be able to determine that. But so it doesn't necessarily mean linked stories. It's just, and sometimes it's confusing and sometimes it really works when, a story is told from different
Oh,
perspectives.
totally.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So in writing and linking these stories, did you find yourself ever wondering what's special about Jewish families and what's universal?
I was always interested in sort of writing about this particular family. And I think as a novelist, and you'll probably hear this from other fiction writers, it's the particularities that make something come alive in a story. I've heard from readers that they do find it very universal, from readers who are certainly not Jewish. A reader in Pleasanton, California told me that the dynamic between the older sisters who fall out with each other, reminded her of her aunts in India. And, she said, it's very interesting that the brothers managed to, pull it together and maintain a relationship, and the women don't forgive each other. And I think she said that she thought that was universal. I'm not sure, but, it rang true for her. And it's been really fun to hear from people from different backgrounds about the dynamic and how it rings true for them.
That's interesting. So, I was at the National Jewish Book Awards last night, and someone from the podium mentioned that this year marks the 75th anniversary, not only of the Jewish Book Awards, but also of the publication of the first in Sidney Taylor's classic All of a Kind Family series. And that series was considered groundbreaking. It was really the first book from a mainstream publisher to feature Jewish children and reach a sizable general audience. So I immediately made a mental connection because I was thinking about today, and I was sitting there and I jotted down a note about that and your portrayal of Jewish families and your mainstream reach. So I did a little research, and I went back to an article about a review of June Cummins' book, she wrote a biography of Taylor a few years back, and she wrote that Taylor was a transformational figure, not only in American children's literature, but in American Jewish life as well. All of a Kind Family and its 4 sequels, published over the next 25 years, introduced millions of Americans to Judaism, forging a bridge through literature that moved Jewish characters and themes into the national arena, enlarging the public's understanding and increasing its acceptance of American Jews. So while Jews, so we thought, had long since crossed that threshold of acceptance, it's a different and fraught time. And we know that some of our notions of acceptance have been somewhat misguided. So I wonder if you see yourself, it's kind of a big thing to put on you, but I wonder if you see yourself as an author whose books have been widely read and reviewed as playing that role once again, bringing Jewish characters and themes to a wider audience, and with it perhaps a better understanding.
Well, first of all, I loved Sidney Taylor's books. And as a child, I read all of them multiple times, and in Hawaii, I should say. And, everything you say about her is true. And her stuff is so charming, and her characters are so real and believable and relatable for people of so many different, backgrounds. And so, yeah, that she was a gift and gave a gift to the world. In terms of my own role, I don't sit down to write and think I have the mantle of Judaism on me and I need to, popularize Jewish tradition and explain things. Never want to explain things, but I would love to follow in Taylor's footsteps in just making people come alive without lectures and lessons, and showing Jewish people as people. That is what fiction can do. And when you can identify with a main character, even if that character is from a different background from yours, that's one small step toward peace in this world.
Yeah, interesting. And it's true that This Is Not About Us is infused throughout with Jewish holidays, lesser known references from Camp Ramah to the Hallel prayer, and you don't explain them. You just kind of throw them in there, and it almost feels like, how could Jews really, relate to that or understand? But it does seem that non-Jews are reading. You gave one example. What is your sense generally about the response that you're getting from the larger non-Jewish community?
This is just anecdotally from people that I meet, but they just enjoy the stories. And to them, it's maybe not primarily about Judaism, but maybe it's just about family. It's about being middle-aged and confessing to your elderly parents that you're dating somebody. It's, about children going to dance class. It's about music. There are many threads in the book. And, I think that people have no trouble with references that might not be totally familiar to them, and again, enjoy not being explained to. I can tell you that when I was a very young writer, and I'm saying like 19 years old, I started publishing in Commentary magazine, and they had a policy that every time you use a Hebrew or Yiddish word, you had to translate it in your work. And I rejected that and pushed back against that. And of course, it was interesting to me that it was like the Jewish magazine and the Jewish editors who were mostly concerned about it. But I've always followed that policy of not explaining, and certainly not over explaining traditions, rituals, words. Trying to weave it in context so that it's understandable, but not sort of adding footnotes. And I pursued that in Catterskill Falls, my first novel as well, which was enjoyed by many people who were not Jewish, and many Jewish people who were certainly not Orthodox.
And of course, we all read books about different, ethnic groups. I just finished a very, very long book about, India and the Indian characters. And it was, not everything was understandable. I had to either look things up or just pass over it. And it was still a wonderful story. So that's certainly true. But of course, I get the sense of like, what is it that people are getting from the Jewish piece of it? But, it's wonderful that you're out there doing that. And again, you kind of made clear, this burden is not like on you, but I wondered whether there was any desire to get this out at this time, having to do with the challenging times that we're in, especially even in the literary world where people are, Jewish authors are having more difficulty, not really popular ones like you. And there's certainly a lot of light out there as well, but there also are some difficulties. So I wonder if in any way there was an impetus in terms of timing, or you had that time frame years ago and it didn't really affect anything.
So I actually wrote this book in between my two novels that you mentioned, in between Sam and Isla, and the decision was to publish Isla first. So this book has been done for a while, and the whole thing was written before the events of October 7th and all of the aftermath of that. Before the protests happened on university campuses, before some of the incidents have happened with Jewish writers. It all was written before that. So I can't claim to, respond to any of that in this book. It was done. I would also say, just to give you perspective, I'm really interested in all of those things. I'm very interested in anti-Semitism and the flare-ups that are happening now. But as somebody who's not a journalist, but as a novelist, it will take me a long time to respond in my work in whatever way that I do respond. And I will not respond directly as I might in an op-ed or in a speech or in a class. It's by nature, my profession is not reactive. My work is not reactive. It's reflective. So it will take time, I think, for me and for other fiction writers to address these things properly.
We've heard that from a lot of Israeli writers as well,
Mm-hmm.
which makes sense. Yet your book has so many, so many wonderful perceptive observations. And I remembered laughing knowingly at the reference to one of the characters who was reading the Wall Street Journal because he had canceled his subscription to the New York Times to protest his coverage of Israel. And of course, that's been going on for years. That's not just since post-October 7th, but maybe even more so now. So, some of those pieces just resonate. Right.
Oh, for sure. And it's all there because that's part of these people's lives,
Right. So let's switch to your focus on food, which of course is an essential ingredient throughout the book because it's, after all, about a Jewish family. So food needs to be central. So the book begins with a focus on the infamous apple cake, which ends up having outside repercussions in the family. And I wondered how you employed food so creatively, be it the apple cake or the vegan Seder that you describe in such great detail in that wonderful chapter. Did you construct the story around the particular food, or did you have the story in mind first and then find the right foods to incorporate?
Oh, for sure. I had the characters and the story in mind first. I start from character. I knew what Sylvia would bake, just as I knew what Helen would struggle to bake. I knew what kind of bakers they would be because I knew them. So the person comes first and then the food. And I knew that Phoebe and her boyfriend would be vegan at this time and make their parents crazy and, need to have a vegan Seder. So, so it really started from the people. I should say about the apple cake, Apple cake is not a hard recipe, and that's one of the things that is the problematic. It drives Helen crazy because Helen works so hard and she's a good and fussy baker. Sylvia is an intuitive baker who throws together an apple cake that's crowd pleasing, and that's so annoying, you know. So, but it's been fun hearing people responding to the different kinds of food in the book, and the way that food interplays with some of the holidays and life cycle events in the book.
Mm. Do you like to bake and cook?
I am a very simple baker and cook, and I do my best work on the page, I would say. And my mother was a great baker, and she baked things way more interesting and difficult than apple cake. She did apple strudel, and she did mandelbrot, and she did incredible rugelach, and she could make a Linzer tort. People cried when they had her cake. I am not at that level. I save my creativity for my work.
I'm with you 100%. My mother also was a great baker, and I'm not.
Yeah.
I'm good with brownie mix. So you have a wonderfully descriptive, amusing, and very timely chapter about Passover, where the vegan Seder is just a piece of the holiday that you tackle. And I want to quote from that. The chapter is called Redemption Song, and some of you might have made the connection with the Bob Marley song we played in the introductory slideshow. Hat tip to our producer. And this message is where the two adult brothers, Dan and Steve, are at the second Seder at Steve's house. The story reads, while Dan was non-practicing Orthodox, Steve was egalitarian, which meant Andrea did everything. She compiled her own Haggadah with readings from Emma Lazarus to Emma Goldman. At Andrea's table, you never knew what would turn up: an orange for oppressed humans, a tomato for migrant farmers, a banana for refugees. When she asked Dan, what is freedom, he shifted in his chair because he hated off-road Judaism. The unscripted Seder, the personal connections, although he felt oppressed by the old rituals, and this was aside after completely purging his house of all the chametz and more, he preferred them, which is why he brought his own Haggadah. So I'm curious, as many of us prepare to sit down to our family Seders, this passage and chapter really resonate. And it captures so much about the contemporary Jewish family, the fights and the memories, the different ways of embracing, displaying, or rejecting Jewish tradition. What were you thinking about when you wrote that chapter?
Again, I was thinking about these people and just knowing them. I knew exactly what Dan would think of, his brother and his sister-in-law's Seder, which is the creative Seder, and how it would make him crazy, shout out to Ariel and the people who put the playlist together, because the redemption song is sung at the second Seder in that chapter. And there's also that wonderful song by Debbie Friedman with Miriam, which is also referenced in the book. But, it's just that I know these people. I know that Dan's wife, Melanie, would have gone to Camp Ramah, that she came from LA, that she did sing Debbie Friedman's Havdalah tune, I just knew them. So it was completely natural. It wasn't like I was trying to like an anthropologist, like trying to put in all of these references to make a composite portrait or anything. It was just a very natural expression of who they were.
Right. And I'm sure your experience is such that you've been to Seders where there are oranges on the Seder plate, or, all kinds of other things, and people feeling differently. Do you want to share at all what your own family Seders look like in comparison to the ones that you write about?
But we're not vegan. My family Seder growing up was really special because we lived in Hawaii. So we had our Seder on our lanai, and we did it outside. And my mother always made stuffed veal breast, and she's an incredible cook. And this was Hawaii, so she had to make stuff from scratch. And her sponge cake, which used like a dozen egg whites, would rise up really high, and it was just so fluffy, and everything she made was incredible. My own family Seder, we now that I am older and my husband and I have 3 little grandchildren, we go down to DC for Seder and share our Seder with our son and daughter-in-law, and our other kids come down there, and we order food. Nobody tries to make veal. My husband might make some desserts, and he's very good. He's a very good Pesach baker, actually. My mother would very much approve of his cakes. But we don't try to sort of spend a week, ahead of time creating all of this stuff.
Right.
So, it evolves. The service and the Seder service is traditional, like the one my parents did. And so that remains the same.
With the I'm blanking on the name of the coffee Haggadah.
The Maxwell House.
House.
Yeah. Oh yeah, we have that, but everybody brings their own Haggadah. My mother had a reproduction of like a 13th century Haggadah, which was a lot shorter than the later ones, and she would always say, "My Haggadah says we're done." When she got to that point, it's like an illuminated manuscript that she had like a folio of it.
Mm-hmm.
And I use my childhood Haggadah, which is very Zionistic and ends with a picture of like the kibbutzniks with their hoes and their spades, building the land, and the reproduction of the Declaration of Independence of Israel right at the end. It's a very kind of Hadassah type Haggadah that I use.
I'm going to switch to some of the audience questions. We have a bunch of questions, a bunch of praise. We love the book. One, Judith is asking, this is not about us. It's so different from Isola. How does your writing process change when you switch from historical fiction to something like This Is Not About Us? Does your mindset change? I enjoyed both, and the Seder scenes in this latest book had me laughing out loud.
Oh, thank you. Fun fact, I wrote them at the same time. They overlapped. So I was working on this one sort of very gradually before, during, and after the historical novel. In a way, it was easier to work on things that were so different. There was no danger that, 16th century Marguerite's voice would creep into to sort of the New Jersey dance studio that, Sylvia's granddaughters attend. So I kind of enjoyed the switching it up.
Okay. Can you say how the dog walker chapter relates to the family? I couldn't find any connection.
I got that question a lot. A lot of readers were really puzzled. They were sort of like, what is happening here? So Jamie the dog walker is the sister of Heather, who is a more major character, but she's the sister, so she's a little bit more tangential. And I had originally thought about writing more stories about Heather's sisters, but this was the only one. I pruned the book, and this is the one that was left. And, I've done some reflection about readers' response to this. They were just like, taken aback, like, where is the story coming from? And was this from a different book or something that you put it in? And I thought about how the characters in my own book would respond to that story, the romances themselves. This is kind of meta, but Helen would hate it to discover that there was this story that didn't quite fit as in her mind as well, or seemed a little strange to her. And Sylvia would be baffled. She would say she likes the story, but she'd be baffled. But Phoebe, the granddaughter, that would be her favorite story in the book. So I think it's a bit of a litmus test on the reader. So what kind of reader are you? How flexible are you? Are you ready for that wild card?
That's a really interesting response, and delving into the characters, which, just illustrates what you were saying about really getting to know those characters and delving deep into their souls. So one question from Robin is it hard to say goodbye to these characters when you're finished with the book?
Oh, yeah, it's always hard to say goodbye to them. I think of my characters, it's sort of like being the mother of grown children. Like, you say goodbye, but you revisit them through your readers, really. So I sent them off to you. I sent them out into the world to you guys. And I hope they make good choices. I hope they thrive out there. But I've said what I have to say about this family.
And time to go on to another. Is there any sense, or you want to reveal what your next project is? You're so prolific.
I never tell what I'm working on when I'm working on it, but I am writing a new book. And if you reconvene with me in like 3 years, I will tell you all about it. Okay. It does have Jewish elements. I will tell you that. It has some Jewish elements in it. Quite a bit.
Okay. In this, somebody's asking, in the second paragraph of the book, both apples and cake, but not apple cake, are mentioned. Was this done deliberately to make apple cake more central?
It's so interesting. It's an astute question. I was not conscious of doing that when I worked on that opening, but since then, at various readings and events, I have read that passage and I've noticed it as I was reading it aloud to the audience. So it's there. It's clearly a lot is happening in the writer's subconscious.
Interesting. So you've kind of alluded to this, and I don't want to give a full spoiler, but somebody's asking about the end. And the question is whether you contemplated a different reckoning or ending to a
Mhm.
certain family relationship.
Yeah, well, so delicately put. I um I always knew. I say at the end of Apple Cake, the opening episode of the book, that these sisters never reconciled. They even when their family members begged them to reconcile, their children said life is too short, for this. I said there that they don't reconcile, and I just kept to it. So it's not even a spoiler. I stayed consistent. And people have said to me, but why didn't Helen and Sylvia reconcile? Why couldn't they forgive each other? You know, and then my answer to that is sort of like, why do we not have world peace? It's hard. People are difficult. I'm sure your family would never have a situation. And of course, my family is perfect. That's why I call the book This Is Not About Us, but it's out there. These conflicts are out there.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So, what Susan is asking about the family's name being referred to as Rubenstein. I believe Rubenstein was Dan and Steve's last name. The family
Yeah.
actually should be referred to as Helen, Sylvia, and Jean's father's name. Please advise about this.
So it's because there's so many characters who are Rubensteins in, Steve and Dan being the central ones, and then their grandchildren. You're right. The other women, Sylvia took her husband's name, just as Jean took the name Rubenstein. So it is a larger family than that name. I just chose that name. And I'll tell you why I chose the name Rubenstein for that part of the family. It was because my mother, who was a really good pianist, loved Chopin, and she played Chopin, and her favorite interpreter of Chopin was Arthur Rubinstein, and she used to play his records when I was growing up, and his recordings. And it was a nod to my mother and in honor of her that I named Dan and Steve. I gave them and Jean the last name Rubinstein.
Oh, that's lovely. Somebody's asking, would you ever consider writing a children's book? And I think you have, and maybe I just left that out of the bio. Is that true?
No worries. I wrote a book for younger readers, which, like 10 to 12. I think it's sort of out of print now, but I did write that. Who knows? Anything is possible. I've had illustrators approach me and say, I would love, there's a story, a piece in this book called Ambrose, where little girl Lily, writes her own, she wants to be a writer, and she writes her own sort of fairy tale. And a children's book illustrator contacted me and said, I want to make that into a book. Who knows? Never say never.
That was a beautiful story. I think she was my favorite character, Lily.
Oh, thank you. I've heard that from other people as well.
Mm-mm. Have any of your books been optioned for a movie?
They have been. Movies haven't been made, but books have been optioned. I think there are many steps between an option and an actual film. These things are expensive to make.
Can you tell us which ones have been optioned?
Intuition was, Countessville Falls was. Those two I remember. Those two is Intuition was also optioned for like a mini series, and a script was written. But so they've all sort of gone to different levels, but nothing has been made into a film.
So you got some education about that other part of creativity, right? The Hollywood and
I don't know much.
yeah. So somebody's saying that she thinks that Bette Midler, also Jewish, grew up in Hawaii. Did you grow up in the same area? Is there a Jewish neighborhood in Hawaii?
There's no Jewish neighborhood per se. Bette Midler did grow up in Hawaii. She's older than I am, so I didn't know her. She was probably gone by the time I, was sort of living there, or was on her way off to the mainland. I think she lived on the other side of the island from me. But no. There's no Jewish neighborhood. There are not enough Jews to have a Jewish neighborhood.
And plus, there's so many beautiful parts that people just spread out, right?
Yeah.
Okay. So, one last question. Back to the apple cake. Do you make apple cake yourself? Is that one of your simple recipes?
No, I've never made an apple cake in my life. I write fiction, I make it up. But my son makes a good apple cake. My oldest son makes a very good apple cake.
Well, if you got your son to be able to cook and bake, that to me is an accomplishment.
Oh, yeah.
All right. So there's so much more to talk about, Allegra, but I think we're going to end on this note about apple cake and family and satyrs and all of the wonderful things that you talked about, your writing process. It's just really been a delight having you here, and we really appreciate that you are here. And again, I urge everybody to buy a copy of the book, buy it for your friends and your family, and really get this story out there, because you, in fact, may recognize part of the Rubenstein family in your own family. So I thank you for being here. I want you to hang on, though, because we have a few upcoming announcements about upcoming programs. In the near future, on Thursday, April 23rd at 7 p.m. Eastern Time, I will be joined by renowned Israeli journalist and author Mati Friedman for a conversation about his new book, Out of the Sky, Heroism and Rebirth in Nazi Europe, about the enduring relevance of Hannah Senesh and her ill-fated mission to rescue Jews during World War II, a mission that became a Zionist legend, and will also discuss the challenges Israel faces today. Not a small subject. And on Tuesday, May 19th at 7 p.m. Eastern Time, I'll be in conversation with food world luminary Adina Sussman, whose new cookbook, Tsuris, 100 Easy Breezy Tel Avivi Recipes, will just have been published. You can pre-order that now. With its focus on uncomplicated Israeli-inflected cooking, Sussman, the author of the best-selling Sababa and Shabbat cookbooks and the beloved food columnist at Hadassah magazine, developed Tsuris in the shadow of the Hamas attacks on October 7, 2023, when she said she felt both a spiritual and practical need to streamline her time in the kitchen as the world around her seemed to be unraveling. We will once again have a special giveaway with anyone registering to attend that virtual program automatically entered to win a free copy of Tsuris. Links to register for all upcoming programs are in the chat box on the hadassahmagazine.org website, and will be in a follow-up email to this program, which will also include a link to the podcast episode of this interview with Allegra. You can also find links to purchase This Is Not About Us in the chat box and in the follow-up email. And if you haven't yet discovered our podcast, please be sure to do so. You'll still want to register for these live events to be part of the real-time conversation and ask the great questions like you asked tonight. But in case you miss it, you'll be able to get the podcast and listen while taking a walk, commuting, or cooking dinner, and you can share it with your family and friends. In addition to listening and sharing today's conversation with Allegra Goodman, you'll find earlier conversations with Rabbi Angela Buchdahl, Yossi Klein-Alevi and Lee Yaron, Maya Arad, Mayim Bialik, Dara Horn, Ayelet Sabari, and Mary Morris. Find it wherever you get your podcasts. And speaking of giveaways, the time has come to announce our lucky winners of a free copy of Allegra's book. The winners are, drumroll please, Helen Hill and Bela Kamen. Congratulations, and you will be receiving an email from us to let you know how you will receive your books. I want to thank Leah Finkelstein, our senior and book editor who helped plan and implement this program, along with the magazine's digital editor, Ariel Kaplan, who both promoted and produced it and came up with the playlist, probably with help from Leah. And a shout out to our partners in Hadassah's engagement and marketing and communications divisions, who always play an important role in making these events happen. Also, one more reminder about the crisis fundraising campaign underway for Hadassah hospitals. Please consider donating, as Israel is under intense threat and the needs are great. Thanks again, Allegra, for being with us. We really appreciate it.
Thank you. And thank you for all that you and Hadassah do.
Thank you. And thanks to everyone for joining us. From all of us at the magazine, we wish everyone who celebrates a happy and peaceful Passover, Chag Sameach. Until next time, goodbye.